Thank you so much, everyone. And I want to echo what Nellie said about the warm welcome that we've had, I think, in the times that we're currently living in. Warmth is so important in reminding us what it is to be human. So I really am very grateful to the organizers for that. Now, as that bio probably suggested, I research quite a lot of different things. I'm based in Goldsmiths Department of Media, Communications and Cultural Studies. And it's a marvelous place to be because nobody tells me what to do, really, in terms of what to research. So I am interested in media and markets and cultural studies and sociology and political economy and art and creativity. And I'm also interested in critical feminist approaches, critical race approaches, decolonial and global south perspectives. But the one thing that all my work has in common is that I am interested in the not, as in what is not there, the silent, the invisible, especially where invisibility is equal to power. So I've spent years researching the ways that financial markets have been made to look invisible quite deliberately so that we never change the way that finance operates. And I now find that I spend even more of my time looking at how the tech sector does exactly the same thing. So this has taken me to digital platforms and also to artificial intelligence. And more recently, I've moved into the field of software studies, which is a subfield of media studies. It's associated with scholars like Wendy Chun and Matthew Fuller, who is my colleague at Goldsmiths. Now, for me, researching digital platforms, I felt had a sense of visibility because these are company structures and we can see them, we can see what they do. And artificial intelligence also has its own sort of visibility due to the degree of media and market hype around these particular automation tools. But software, I find, really is the invisible affordance, the middleware of the digital economy. And I'm struck by this point from Wendy Chun, that software seemingly allows one to grip the entire elephant because it is the invisible whole that generates the sensuous parts. Now, she wrote that more than a decade ago, and I find that it is now getting harder to visualize software as the invisible whole, and I will show you what I mean. So you can see how large the problem is with software by looking at this very one small area that I happen to be working on now. This is an area that I teach and research on, the area of marketing technology. And what you're looking at on the screen, note the date, 2011, the marketing technology landscape, 150 products that were counted up by a company that has been counting since about 2010. Doesn't really matter what these tools do. But the point is how it enables us. This is just one small area, and it allows us to see software and just how proliferating it actually is. So Wendy Chun goes on to say that software's appeal lies in its combination of what can be seen and not seen, what can be known and not known. Its separation of interface from algorithm, of software from hardware, makes software a powerful metaphor for everything that we believe is invisible, yet generates visible effects. So in working with this particular area of software, I asked myself, what are the visible effects of this map? From my perspective, what we are seeing here is a massive system of attention. So this is what Dana Boyd calls technicity of attention. So these software tools do everything from sucking potential customers into digital funnels, and funnel is a term that the industry uses for the way that it shepherds you through the internet toward a particular decision that it wants you to make, most likely converting you into buying something. And this is also a technicity of attention that will do things like dynamically set prices. For anybody who's ever had to buy a ticket for a gig online, you'll know what I'm talking about, because the system will set prices and then the tools will dynamically change those prices if lots of you are trying to buy the same thing at the same time. And it's also a technicity of attention because it will nudge us toward one product versus another. And Amazon is a very famous example for doing this. There's lots of people who are selling through the Amazon marketplace, but Amazon will quite deliberately nudge you toward particular kinds of purchases over others. And then finally, this is a technicity of attention because it will then collect data on what we look at, what we buy, in order to then generate ever more products, more services, and more content. So this is the MarTech landscape in 2024. So that means that the next landscape will be out in a few months, and it'll probably be bigger. So it's now more than 14,000 tools. And as you can see, the actual visual has become meaningless. I mean, what are you meant to do with this as a static visual? So what the builders of this particular map now have you do is sign in, you have to create a password, and then you can use the map interactively. So you can click on bits of it to find out which areas are, representing what particular tools, what particular companies. And it is because we have got to this particular stage with this tiny corner of the software market that I feel that we now need to develop a language and a set of concepts to describe how these software solutions are designed to pass over organizational, sectoral, and national boundaries while embracing aspects of the specific features within these settings. I'm not the first person to say this. This reflects work that's being done by Neil Pollock and others who have studied software and their generalization. So I feel that we really pressingly need a much more visual language to understand the impact of software and its reach. For those of you who are interested in the kinds of maps and topographies that are existing out there, we already have things like maps of data centers. So there's a very good website that you can go to that shows you all of the major data farms around the world. So that's one way of looking at things. There's also work on maps of fiber optics cables, another way of looking at things. You can find maps that show us the energy usage that has come about because of the digital economy. And each of these maps on their own, they get us close. But for the most part, I find that these maps will show us a back and forth movement. They don't show us how certain forms of software have actually become sedimented into life and actually changed physical life itself. So as Neil Pollock and his co-authors point out, complex organizational information systems do not travel. They become fixed in time and space. And this is exactly what has happened in the marketing technology landscape. There are now some of these tools that have been in use for well over 30 years. And for many organizations and entire sectors of the global economy, they don't know any other way of operating but having particular forms of software as their foundation. And of course, now much of this software is cloud-based. So there's even more forms of these software that are used generically, internationally, whether they're appropriate for the purpose or not. So more and more of these tools are being designed to work across many contexts, across many national borders, and systems that are designed to do this, says Neil Pollock, are much less investigated and poorly understood. And he argues that we should be correcting this, and I agree. Part of the reason we have a poor understanding and a poor visual is that the very excellent studies that have been done to date will tend to focus on maybe one or two software tools and maybe do some comparative work. They might do some kind of anthropological work that will be quite in depth. So this might show us how one or two tools work together in tandem, but by and large, we don't have an understanding of how all of these tools are actually working together as an entire market or system. And this could be a fundamental problem, Neil Pollock argues, because in social sciences in particular, which is probably where a lot of my work is situated, we're not very good at thinking about movement. So of course, many of these tools are also proprietary. So if you're a researcher like me and you want to access them, good luck with that, because they're not allowing you anywhere near their tools. They vehemently do not want us to understand who connects with what and how. And one of the things they particularly don't want us understanding is how much money they are making from these individually branded tools, many of which are actually based on a foundation of open source software. So these proprietary arguments that these companies put forward, I'm talking about companies like SAP, Salesforce, etc., means that we now have a landscape being built underneath us, around us, above us, without ever realizing software's extent and its increasing immovability. And I'm not alone in making this argument. John Sullivan, writing about the political economy of software, says that the differences between media hardware and software, for example, are beginning to erode, and we can see this in other areas of the economy. So the fungible nature of software code is hardening thanks to the complex technical ecosystems and economic markets that have been constructed around specific software applications and protocols. So to put this more simply, for me, the notion of software as soft is losing its meaning in modernity, even as layers of software are rapidly terraforming the Earth. Now, the term terraforming usually refers to the transforming of ecosystems of other planets or moons to make them capable of supporting Earth-like life. And terraforming is, of course, not a fictitious pursuit alone. It's actually a very serious area of research, particularly in the field of geoengineering. So contemporary geoengineering has emerged from a consideration of how to build an atmosphere capable of supporting human life on other planets, terraforming for human survival and comfort. And it turns out that tech bros spend a lot of their time thinking about this. I mean, I think if you follow Elon Musk at all, you know it's like his dream to live on Mars. And I find that this trickles down all the way through the global tech sector, so much so that I learned recently that the notion of terraforming is barely metaphorical in the tech industry because the word is even used to brand a popular infrastructure as software tool. So Terraform, which is open source software designed by HashiCorp, which was last year bought by IBM. So, no problems there. I also very recently discovered from scholars who work on gaming and board games that the board game Terraforming Mars, how many of you have played it? Anyone here? Okay. I see one person. I feel kind of relieved about that. Okay, 2. All right, so Terraforming Mars, I have been told by people who know, is a wildly popular game in the tech industry. So of course, for those of you who are sci-fi fans, you'll also know that terraforming is a really pervasive idea right throughout science fiction, whether it is novels, but also many of the works that have then been turned into TV series or into films. So on screen, you're looking at the Mars trilogy by the novelist Kim Robinson, whose books inspired the game Terraforming Mars. And Mars is often at the center of both the terraforming imaginary, motivated by the idea that environmental damage on Earth, the end of fossil fuel, a destabilized climate, overpopulation, disease, and food scarcity, will then drive us to other planets. And the idea of science fiction might inspire technological innovation is hardly new. I'm sure many of you know that there are actually certain products produced by particular companies that were inspired by Star Trek, for example. So it's quite common for ideas from fiction to jump into tech design. So there's nothing surprising about the fact that terraforming is a very popular concept and even a product name in the tech sector. But the term itself goes way, way back. It was coined I gather, in about the 1940s by Jack Williamson, writing under the pseudonym Will Stewart. And for those of you who follow these sorts of fictional tales, you probably have your favorites. Terraforming appears in the work of Philip Dick, Isaac Asimov, Anne McCaffrey, Octavia Butler, the list goes on. And probably one of the most famous examples from Hollywood is the advanced visual representation of terraforming that appeared in the Star Trek films. But terraforming is not just an interplanetary project. There has been a growing interest in the idea of terraforming planet Earth. And this goes back to at least the 1920s, when German architect Hermann Sorgel conceived of a gigantic engineering and colonization plan with various names, including Atlantropa. Sorgel's proposal included several hydroelectric dams at key points on the Mediterranean Sea that would cause the sea level to drop and enable the organizers to reclaim land. And so, of course, it was no surprise that the Nazis were quite enamored with this plan. And so this was in real life, but a fictitious version of the story also appears in Philip Dick's The Man in the High Castle. So, of course, this particular version of terraforming is a settler colonization project, and it's extractive in every way. The United States has been very serious about researching this and even had plans that would use nuclear explosives, because, you know, what could go wrong, as an engineering tool to literally move mountains and build new harbors in the name of economic progress with little attention to fallout. Terraforming planet Earth also has its ecological appeal, which is a material that Daphne really picked up on so well, to many who are concerned that the climate crisis will mean that we will need to terraform Earth if it is to remain a viable host for its own life. The plans for many smart cities that have been popping up and many forms of smart urban design have been discussed as a form of terraforming, focused on governance of infrastructures, usually using artificial intelligence and automation, so that these smart cities can operate on much longer timescales than exist in, say, cultural narratives. So over the years, as some of these sci-fi authors have been interviewed, Kim Robertson in particular commented that when he was working on his 1990s novels about Mars, it occurred to him that we were already terraforming Earth in the here and now, but by accident, and in ignorance of how it worked or what might happen. But I don't think that what we're seeing now is accidental at all. But I do believe that our civic structures are very unprepared for the implications. And that's because of the many ethical debates that are triggered by discussions of terraforming as a utopian ideal. Geoengineering schemes, for example, have always refused to recognize the long-term co-evolution of human and natural systems, suggesting that ecologies are simply machines, which is exactly the point in the first presentation. Machines that can be tuned by people to better outcomes. So huge ethical issues there that we see with how the tech sector approaches tech tools. And there are obviously concerns with the impact on life in all forms, whether that's alien life, human life, other kinds of species present on Earth, because they might need to be structurally transformed in order to tolerate the new planet, whether that's because it has reduced gravity, or maybe there might be a need to use gene therapy. You can think of many examples from terraforming in science fiction. As Joseph Masco points out, the modernist position on terraforming refuses to acknowledge the logic or the history of fallout, or to accept that in an era of big data, we still do not have a single planetary vision, but rather a proliferation of planetary optics tied to specific sciences and projects, which may not necessarily align with each other. And I feel that this is a big problem, big part of the problem that I see with software as Terraform, because there is no vision for correcting atmospheric imbalance or some kind of mechanism that can be tuned to optimal human outcomes. Rather, the tech industry's vision for software is that it is an extractive project. It's a project that has little regard for balance and virtually no regard for optimal human outcomes. And one of the obvious problems that we have here is that we do not have the political systems operating at the global scale to address truly planetary problems such as this one. Hence, not only can we not visualize how the Earth is being terraformed by software, we also can't visualize how it needs to be mapped onto those other maps that I mentioned earlier, the maps of data farms, the maps of fiber optics, the maps of energy use in the digital economy. If we were to render that map, what would be left of the natural world for us to see? Suppose the software terraforming here then becomes a prototype for terraforming anywhere else, so that the occupants conform rather than the planet itself. So as I said, this is new work for me, and it was a pleasure to be asked questions by the organizers that I don't necessarily have the answers to yet. But for me, I was thinking, well, are we a software update? And the thing is, of all the words that I could think of, update is the one that least bothered me, because if we are updates, it suggests that we could return to factory settings, for example, which fills me with hope. I actually do think that what the tech industry wants from us is mutation. And mutation is a very, very pervasive idea in terraforming and science fiction as well. Getting us to breathe chlorine, for example, a process that is apparently called areoforming us, so that we can breathe something other than oxygen. You know, it is a metaphor, I think, from the way that we are regarded by the tech sector. And the thing about mutation is that whereas in science fiction, that's a process that can be reversed, how would you reverse mutation in real life? So I find a much more useful word to think about is how we consolidate to protect life in different ways. And here now I'm saying, yes, there's lots of things that we need to be doing collectively. But in terms of some of the things that I've talked about today, I think we need to consolidate on big stuff as well as small stuff. So one of the things that I think would be very helpful, you know, for those of us who work in media studies, maybe to collaborate with those of you who produce visual art, I think that could be a fantastic collaboration, is to think about visualizing software as it actually is terraforming the Earth, not to just understand what digital impulses go back and forth, but to understand how particular items of software are becoming sedimented into the way that we live our daily lives, and to then understand how those pieces of software are talking to each other. Another thing that I think we need to consolidate is the many examples of ideas for how we can fix the state that we're in. I would say over the last 5 years or so, I have read maybe about 20 books that talk about the state that we're in and offer solutions. I've been to many conferences and workshops that talk about the various solutions. But what I've yet to see as someone who works in a very interdisciplinary way is see all of those ideas brought together in one place, to distill them to see which of us can start to do what. I think that would be very helpful for those of us who are feeling a sense of hopelessness at the moment. And then finally, the small stuff. And in many ways, I think the small stuff is actually far more important in terms of us surviving and thriving in the months and years to come. For me, this has to begin with taking a feminist ethics of care toward each other, to find our healing places, to find the people that we really want to be with. For me, this event is an example of that. I knew the minute I walked in the door, dragging my suitcase with me, that I had found my people, you know. So this is an amazing feeling to have. Another example of this happened for me last week. A UK-based not-for-profit organization that I care about very deeply, called Careful Industries, has lost quite a bit of its funding This has been a constant progress of tearing down not-for-profit organizations in the United Kingdom. And this is an organization that is very much about making technology more accessible to communities and grassroots. So they have decided that since they've lost funding, one of the things they're going to do with the time that they now have available is start a reading group for lonely technologists. And this is just me, lonely technologist. So that reading group will be starting online in the UK on Friday, the 10th of March. I think it's 1 p.m. UK time, if anyone wants to look up Careful Industries and to join in. The first book that we're going to be reading is Ruha Benjamin's latest book on imagination. So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about, but I think it's fair for me to stop now and we can pick up on some of these things in the questions and answer session. Thank you very much, everybody.